Order. Clerk, if you call the roll.
Councilmember Filseth?
Here.
Councilmember Niss? Councilmember Scharf?
Aye.
Vice Mayor and Chair Schmidt?
Here.
3 present.
Good. I do not have any cards for public comment. I do note that there has been a change in the title of item number 1. So let us turn to item number 1. Palo, if you want to kick it off.
Good evening, Chair Schmidt, Vice Mayor Schmidt, and council members. Walter Rossman, Budget Director. The first item for tonight is the fiscal year 2015 reappropriation requests for the Monroe Park improvements. For this project, Council approved the contract last night, pending approval to reappropriate unspent funds and move those funds from fiscal year 2015 to 2016, plus additional funding of about $33,000. I have here in the audience department representatives here as well to speak to specific items which you may have questions on, and otherwise this concludes my presentation.
Good. I guess the goal of the Finance Committee is to look over the reappropriations and to direct them to the Council, recommend them to the Council.
That is correct, Vice Mayor.
Good. Are there colleagues who'd like to raise a question? Councilmember Scharf.
So my first question relates to, where was it? First of all, the print is so small on this that if I'm slow, it's because I can barely see it. So it's the Planning Community Environmental Department. It's the establish the $500,000 of the $1 million shuttle research reserve for the fiscal year 2015 non-departmental budget to be used as a contingency account. So I guess I have a real hard time with this one. So I just want to make sure I have it in my mind correctly. If I recall, we voted $1 million for a shuttle from Embarcadero, right, from the Baylands to come up. Staff decided that after we had to vote on that and prove it, which was fairly controversial, that then we should cancel it and not do it. And now you want to take the $1 million and create a $500,000 discretionary fund without council approval to be able to use for whatever you want. That's the way I read it. Is that right? Is that wrong?
So the way, as you know, the contingency reserves, how they work is that the city manager is the only approval authority for moving funds.
Yeah, but this wasn't a contingency reserve that we created. You're creating a $500,000 contingency reserve.
That is correct. And the reason was more a reaction to last year. Last year we had to bring forth, which we can do this year as well, several budget amendment ordinances for parking, transportation, et cetera, related items. And we felt to expedite the process for responding to council requests, instead of doing a budgeted transaction coming back to you, we could establish the contingency reserve.
Well, it would clearly expedite the process if we didn't have a council, if the city manager just always made the decisions. So why would we do that?
That is truly up to the discretion of the council to establish the contingency reserve or not.
I mean, it's not like council even took this $1 million, and it's not like you're doing it over for another shuttle program. You're basically taking $1 million, taking half of it, and creating a new fund, and doing it through this process. It seems inappropriate.
Could I ask Director of Planning to make a comment?
Thank you, council members. Just quickly on the comments about the shuttle program, I just want to clarify. Last year, we did budget for Embarcadero shuttle route, of which we pay a portion of that. The rest is paid by JPB. We did budget for the Crosstown shuttle. We budgeted for the East Palo Alto shuttle, although we're reimbursed the cost of that. And we started thinking about the West shuttle route and budgeted some funds for that. We also budgeted some funds for additional planning work associated with the shuttle, marketing, outreach, and other things. The west route didn't come to fruition, but the Embarcadero route, the Crosstown route, the East Palo Alto route are all operating. What we didn't do is fund this dramatic expansion of the program. We increased frequency on the Crosstown route, but we didn't add a route. And that's why we didn't spend a lot of the money that was in that fund. We do have significant transportation needs as a community, though, and we are currently undertaking a review of the shuttle program and really coming up with what we think is going to be a 5-year look ahead on how the program should be modified, looking at increased frequencies again, looking at the routes, looking at potential on-demand services or door-to-door services. And obviously, we will be coming back to council for any policy decisions having to do with this, but we thought in light of our experiences last year on all of the parking and transportation programs where we had to come multiple times for BAOs and adjustments, that this was an approach that would be beneficial to keep moving on these priorities of the council.
Well, fair enough, but it takes, policy decisions cost money, is what you're saying. But council should be aware, and so should the public, that when we make a policy decision, it costs money, and it shouldn't be buried in a discretionary fund, of which the public and council basically have no idea when they give a policy direction that they're spending money. Every time we give a policy direction, it should come forward with a BAO, so everyone says, yeah, we spent that money, we're agreeing to do it, we understand the policy costs money.
Could I add perhaps a request for Director Gittleman? Could you describe the time frame in which the results of the shuttle study that you just described would be coming back for council discussion?
Thank you. I don't have a specific timeline, but the study is currently underway, so I think it's going to be fairly short order. I also wanted to just make sure everyone's aware that if we procure services or we make expenditures that require contracts, agreements with other agencies and the like, all of those things come to council. So we would never be doing anything other than executing the council's policy direction consistent with the rules around procurement for services and contracts. So the only thing here is the budgetary allocation that happened when those agreements came forward. We wouldn't have to go through that BAO every time this happened. But this is our effort to more efficiently respond to what the council has articulated in terms of priorities around parking and transportation issues.
Okay. So I also had a question, not quite in the same vein. I also had a question about the police utilization study. And here my concern was that, again, I have to read it, is that this was allocated in 2013. It's not a lot of money. And it's really phrased in a way that just sort of made me focus on it, which says, reapportion of these funds will allow police department staff to determine the scope of the study, integrate it into the workload, and hire a consultant to conduct the study. You know, it seemed a little bit the way it was phrased, that back in 2013, there was a plan and, you know, we allocated money to do it. Everyone's been too busy to do it. And now we're going to decide what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. And it sort of struck me that since the money had been allocated, we might as well find a way to spend it. I could be convinced otherwise. It's just, you know, 3 years later, and it seems like we're starting from scratch about how we should do this. And so is it really necessary to spend this money? Or is it just that the money's in the department budget, so now let's find a way to spend it, which is the way it struck me.
Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer. The way it came about was, you may recall, at that time frame, there was a study for fire services. So there were questions from the council, the committee, the finance committee, why don't we do the same for the police? And you tasked the city manager to think about that and see if that was necessary. So at that point, he made a request to conduct that study. And as you mentioned, I think PD is here behind me. They can explain, you know, their staffing situation where it didn't allow them to complete the project. The hope would be for us to be able to review the demand of the services that we need, the resources. Are we right sized? Are we not? Are we utilizing the resources in an appropriate way? Are there any changes that could be made that you may want to consider as a council as a result of the study that is conducted? At a big level, that was the background of that.
as well. Is there any, I mean, is there anyone from the police department or, I mean, I don't mind if just someone say, should we still do this? Explain to me why they think it's a good idea. I mean, I'm not against it necessarily. It just, see, I just don't want us to spend money because it's in the budget.
Yeah, good evening, Councilmember Scharf. Yeah, Ian Hagerman, Senior Management Analyst with the Police Department. I think the PD is, we're interested in doing the study. I think that we're looking for, opportunities to, be as efficient as possible and do our work in the best way we can. Really the delay, as Lalo and others have mentioned, was really a resourcing issue. The folks that are going to be responsible for a lot of the heavy lifting on the study are the same folks that are responsible for replacing our CAD and RMS system, doing kind of all the technology projects in the department. So it's really just been kind of a resourcing issue. We actually have a meeting October 1st, I think, with kind of the command staff of the PD to kind of talk about scoping this out and possible vendors. And we kind of committed to ASD during this last budget process that we'd kind of kick this off in the first half of the next calendar year, so early 2016. So I think to tie it all together, we think it's a good idea. We think that it'll help us, make sure that we're running things appropriately, and we're definitely, going to get it done.
Okay, thanks.
And along those lines, I have to admit, not up to speed on the prior direction and where this is currently standing. So subject to the committee's decision and where this goes, presuming it's still on the table, I'd like to perhaps have our office be a part of that discussion and do an information report to the committee on the outcome and particular priority areas we'd be looking at.
That'd be great. And then finally, the last question I really had was on the stormwater rebates. So I struggled with this one a little bit, and this is the way I read it, which could be incorrect. I just, it's not like the staff report gives a lot of information on these particular items. So what I read it was that when we did the ballot measure back in 2005, we had a, I was going to say, what is it? A measure. Part of the measure was to do innovative. What was it? Funds. I mean, what is it? I want to get it right. Yeah, an annual innovative projects budget. And as part of that, so what staff took that to mean was that we should have rebates for, rebates for homeowners who helped the storm, who did good things with the storm water stuff, and that there was no uptake on that, and so therefore we didn't spend the money, and now we have to come up with another innovative plan and so we have to figure out some way to spend the money. And so I guess the question is, since our next item is, has this gone to the storm drain committee and have they decided, because there is an oversight committee, right, on the storm drain, and are they with this? Do they think we should spend this money? That kind of, because I'd much rather they make the recommendation on this.
Great. Good evening. I'm Joe Teresi from the Public Works Department. And you are correct that back in 2005, there was a certain amount of money earmarked for efforts to try to reduce stormwater runoff and pollutants. At the time of the ballot measure, we had a blue ribbon committee who said, why are we always trying to attack it from the end of trying to make bigger pipes and bigger pumps? Why don't we try to reduce the stormwater itself and attack it from that angle? So we came up with the rebate program, and it's been moderately successful, but we haven't spent the amount of money earmarked. Now, if you recall, a couple of years ago, we took a lot of that money that had built up over the years that hadn't been applied to rebates and used it to implement the Southgate neighborhood stormwater improvements, which were in that innovative vein. And we've been talking about this with the Oversight Committee, and they are concerned that it's not being spent, but they also are clear that they don't want it to be spent for something else. So it's going to be our challenge to find, perhaps another thing like Southgate or try to motivate more interest in the rebate program. But I think it's important to us and to the committee that it be spent for that particular purpose.
Because that's what we told the voters we'd do.
Right.
I agree. So all you're asking us to do, and that was really my question, is we reauthorize this, and then it's going to go to the committee, and the committee will talk about how to spend it. Okay. All right, those were my questions.
Good. Council members, any other questions?
I have a little tiny one. If you go to the print that's even harder to read.
That's the part that's really
Thanks.
hard to read, right?
This is the part that's really.
Oh, yeah, that's even worse.
So if I'm looking at all this, who am I looking at? Palo, who should I be? So if I look at that, at the project title, the fund, the reappropriate adjustment, and so forth, these are all relatively small amounts. And are these amounts that we take out, put back in?
Sure.
Where is this? So if I come way down, I look at Roth building maintenance. That happened to be one of the ones that I looked at. Now, I presume, I don't know whether that is, it says capital improvement fund, but I presume that's one of the ones we decided as a city that we needed to shore up. This didn't have anything to do with their fundraising efforts, am I correct?
That is correct. So what you see here, council member, is basically putting the dollars which are unspent between 2 fiscal years, between either fiscal year 15 or 16. If it's a negative amount, we're actually putting it back into 15. If it's a positive amount, we move money from 15 into 16th fiscal year for the projects which were approved by the council as part of the budget process.
So we had money left over?
That's correct. So what we do in the budget process, we think we will spend a certain amount of money in fiscal 15, and we carry the rest forward. However, we don't know until we close the books exactly how those dollars land, and here we're truing that up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there are no new projects which are asked to be authorized here.
Okay. So this is really just a bookkeeping kind of exercise, to be honest, right?
That is correct.
Not looking as we have been at the reappropriations. Quite different.
That's correct. So for capital,
this is reappropriations.
That's correct. For capital, it's pure bookkeeping, except for the Monroe Park, I mentioned in the presentation, about $33,000 we're asking for extra funds to align with the contract you approved last night. And for the operating, it's really moving money for specific projects from fiscal year 15 into 16.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lala. He made a good point here. In the previous years, this just happened with the CAFR process, and this actually creates visibility to the council. As we change the reappropriation process, and we're showing you the entire capital budget for the entire year in one document, this is now a visible way of how you see how the money flows. Before, it would just be a line item in the CAFR.
Okay, so it is different than it has been, right?
That's correct.
Okay, good. This is the phone book version, right?
That's correct.
Good. Okay, thanks, Rick.
I just wanted to note that I also had circled the $500,000 for the planning department. So I appreciate the back and forth that we've had on that. Let me ask, the library issue is also a substantial amount. It's a library donation fund. And it's spread around technology, training. Is there anything in there that is included in our 2016 budget, or are these all additions to what we voted on in our 2016 budget? This is the $339,000 donation money.
I think these are all, I'm sorry, oh, sorry, hi. I'm Monique Laconge Season-Henney, the library director. These categories are nothing new, and these are all things that I believe that were included as part of that budget. These were just, this is just the bookkeeping to keep us balanced, no? These are new?
So what we did, if I may step in quickly, Monique, what we did here is at the time of the budget development, we didn't know that we will receive those grants. So if we had known in April, let's say, or in March, these grants will come in, we would have included them in the budget. In this case, it's additional dollars for the library department for grants received late in the fiscal year.
Right, but we, the library, had planned on them as part of our planning for the budget for the coming year.
Yeah.
So internally, we knew.
So I guess my question gets down to, are we saving money then from the budget that we voted for 2016? And are there extra resources for the library or for other departments from our budget?
So the way we approved the library, the council approved the library department budget was with outside those grants. However, the library department was counting on getting these funds in order to provide the level of service to the public.
Yes.
So there's no savings per se. It is.
But we did vote a balanced library budget,
That's correct.
and now we have extra funds
Which-
moving in. Doesn't
which-
that free up some of those?
No, it does not. Unless we would use the service level at the libraries. If we were to do that, then there would be. But assume these grants, from Monique's perspective, they were assumed as she presented you performance measures about the library, et cetera. She assumed those dollars.
Right.
They just weren't yet in the book.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I guess I have a more general question. I went to look for reappropriations in our budget documents. And when we vote the budget, we see the 2015 adopted budget and the 2016 proposed budget. Where's the millions of dollars of reappropriations from last year?
So in last year's process, the reappropriation process did not amend the budget. It just kept it the same. So you don't see it in FY15 adopted. However, with the change the council made and with the budget amendment ordinance attached to here, you actually will see the change now in the 16 adjusted budget, a modified budget. So when we come back to you in the part of the quarterly reports or the mid-year report, you will see those dollars in those departments.
Now, next month or so, we're going to get the outside audited look at the budget. Will the reappropriations appear there?
They will not in the fiscal year 15 budget anymore because we're moving from an accounting process to a budget process, which makes it more visible. So last year in the CAFR, you may have learned that there was a line called reappropriations.
Shouldn't there be savings in the 2015 budget if we did not spend the money in that year and we're pushing it to the next year? Shouldn't there be less spending in the 2015 budget?
Is this like a slush fund?
So in the 2015 budget, these dollars we are moving forward to 16, they are available because we either didn't spend them or we saved them. So we're just taking the money forward from one fiscal year to the next, if I answer your question correctly. Unless. Oh. So you will have every year there will be even in the past we had reappropriations coming to the council, to the committee first, because there are always some unspent funds which we would like to carry forward for projects we would like to execute.
Yeah, I guess my base question is there somewhere in the budget I can see that number?
We
Will
give it,
our audited budget say, here's
Right.
the amount that has been transferred?
yeah, it's a complex area, so let me see if we can try to simplify our response and not be so technical. You will not see it in the adopted budget, and you will see it in our first adjustment of our mid-year report under the adjusted column, and that's what Walter was referring to. And then what we'll do is we show you the base budget in that mid-year, and we show you a line item with the reappropriation. And that should match whatever you approve tonight. And so that's how you track it. So you don't track it from the base budget, the adopted budget of
Yeah.
the June meeting, but you see it going forward.
And then when you go and introduce the new budget in March, April, that carried forward amount will be in the,
Okay, I understand that. So no, it will not, because these are all one-time dollars, which I assume to be spent. But as we close out the fiscal year, let's say fiscal year 16, and indeed we come to the same situation that some funds to be carried forward, it will always happen after you adopted the 17 budget. So you'll always be trailing. Because we don't know whether we can get the work done or not, are we able to award a contract or not. And sometimes we're trying to push very hard to get this done, and sometimes it doesn't work out.
It's very rare that we have something. I think the only thing that comes to mind, and I'm not picking on planning, is a comprehensive plan. For a couple of years, you probably remember seeing that reappropriation, but that's usually one-off. Usually it's like Walter stated, there's something new, something else is the reappropriation.
yeah. Okay, I guess that makes that 500,000 contingency item an important.
So if I may, if Councilmember Shar for the committee would like to entertain that, the other thing we could do, what Lalo was suggesting, we could make the contingency pending council approval, so we can treat it like the city council contingency. If we were to use the funds, we'll have to come back to you, if that makes the committee more comfortable.
No, why should I just not approve it? Why shouldn't we do it the way we've always done it?
Let me try that, because it's a good question. So one of the things that we do is we have a 18.5% target for our budget stabilization reserve. If you don't, then what will happen is then you're going to be forced to take that money from next year's budget stabilization reserve, and you're going to drop it below 18.5 because you don't have this $500,000 in there. So what we're trying to do is give you a vehicle so you don't go below the 18.5 by having this $500,000 that you know you want to spend. We just don't know how or how much, and you have it in there. If you don't use it, let's say you use 100,000, then you have 400,000 more into the budget stabilization reserve that you can then later move to infrastructure. So it's really giving you the cushion so we can stay within our target of 18.5. That's really what it's doing from a budgetary standpoint. It's not trying to force you to make a call, because you have to give the authority.
Okay, so you lost me. I don't know if the rest of you follow that, but I didn't. So where is the 400,000 now, 500,000 now?
So right now, it's in the fiscal year 15 budget stabilization reserve. So let me back up because you're right. I probably assumed some things here. So the reserve policy says that at the end of the fiscal year, anything above the 18.5% of reserve, the city manager has the discretion to send it forward to the infrastructure reserve, leaving you back at 18.5 if there's any excess.
Right.
Right? So we're going to probably do that or give you some direction or recommendation. Let's say that we do that to 16 and we go to 18.5. Now you have these transportation needs. You didn't move the 500,000. You're going to dip from that reserve and you're going to go below the 18.5.
But we're only going to go below because the city manager has moved the money above the 18.5% over to the infrastructure funding. That's the only reason we're going below. Is that correct?
Yes.
So in this, it's discretionary on the city manager. So couldn't the city manager say to himself, I'm leaving the extra few $100,000? We don't have a requirement that if we go above 18.5, you move it. It's discretionary with the city manager.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, you make the final call, you the council. So if you wanted...
We don't make the call. I thought the city manager...
I'm sorry?
I thought the city manager... I thought if this money goes into the... I understood it this way. If I'm understanding it wrong, tell me. But I understand if we don't approve this money goes into the budget stabilization reserve, where it just sits, and the city manager has the discretion, but not the obligation, to move all of the money above 18.5 to the infrastructure fund. He can leave, because he has discretion, some of that money in the budget stabilization reserve. Am I incorrect?
That's correct. At the end of the day, you
so
can change
he could look
those.
at this and say, we're likely to spend 300,000 of this, so I'm leaving 300,000. He could say, I'm leaving 400,000. He could say, I'm leaving all 500,000.
So it does exactly the same thing as moving the 500 by your scenario. There's no difference. The difference is that we have to write a BAO. That's the only difference.
Right, this is the difference. You have to write a BAO.
Yeah. And so what we were
Which
saying
is what
to
I think you should do. That's the point. You have to write a BAO. Why should this be any different? I mean, why have a BAO process? Why not say for everything in the city then, the city manager can decide not to do a BAO?
Well, actually, that's the item for later tonight, number 3.
Okay. But I mean, that's really the point.
So
if you're going to fix that structurally throughout the city in item number 3, why should I agree to it to be different? Why should we single this out and do a one-off on this? How is that good budgeting, to do a one-off?
It doesn't change the budget. It's a process issue. That's really what it is.
Well, but why should you do a one-off on process? I mean, this is what our auditor comes back and gives you a hard time about, Lalo. I mean, that's really what that's about. It's like there are procedures and stuff, and then the auditor comes in and says that, budget did a one-off over here, and that's what we shouldn't have done. Or utilities did a one-off.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what they're talking about, at least the way I understand it.
It's technically, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no findings. We've done it for years before this council. And you call them different contingencies. I've seen cities that have 20 contingencies for that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a matter of preference and style. If you don't like it, it's okay.
Okay.
Could I just comment to that? Because I understand where you're going, Greg, but that is one of those choices. And it's a process thing. And I don't know if I'd call it a one-off. I think I would characterize it as you will, but I don't think that's an unusual process.
Well, it's clearly a one-off. We don't typically have a habit of creating large contingency funds to get around the fact that the city manager, what's the city manager's authority?
85,000.
To get around the city manager's $85,000 authority. We don't have 20 different funds in which the city manager can then go do that. And I don't see any reason why we should do it differently.
Comment from the planning director?
Yeah, thank you, council members. You know, obviously, this is your decision to make. I just wanted to articulate really the motivation behind this was a recognition that we, the Planning and Transportation Department, spend a lot of our evenings here with the council working on multiple initiatives. Many times we come to the council like we did last night to get some decision from the council, and invariably that decision leads to additional requests for study or for information. We were attempting to recognize that and the amount of work that we have going through our department right now in a process that would enable us to be more nimble, to be responsive to the council's priorities, and to just make the system work a little better. If it makes you uncomfortable, then obviously that's your prerogative, but it was really in recognition for the amount of work that's being handled in the office and the priority with which we know the council holds some of these efforts.
Thank you.
Could I just respond to that for just a second? In a nice way. Look, I didn't mean to cast any that you were trying to get away with anything or that it was inappropriate in a sort of a way that, well, I understand that you had good intentions behind it. And I understand that, you know, you're overworked and that you really just want to be efficient. But financial structural, procedures that are put in place for a reason. And it's always more efficient to ignore them. It always is. It's always easier. I mean, that's really what the auditor comes in and says when there are these issues that come up. You know, the auditor wants to put in some new process and procedure, and Lalo comes to finance and says, you know, if you do this, and he wrings his hands, I mean, not inappropriately. I mean, there's a tension there. I understand that. But I don't think that you can suddenly create large amounts of cash, and I consider $500,000 to be a large amount of cash. I mean, you know, if you think the city manager should be able to approve more than $85,000, we could have a system-wide discussion of that. I just think large amounts of cash that don't come to council, that the city manager gets to just approve, I think it's just the wrong way to go.
Could I respond to that? Or are you going to?
Well, I think we ought to move to a motion, concrete motion of how to approach this and deal with it. So any suggestions?
But just another comment, because in any governing body I've served on, this is always a discussion. Because the question is, should the person have authority, who has the authority to use that money? Or should they have to come to the governing body and ask them to use that money? That's really what your question is.
It's not actually.
Well, then I must not be hearing it correctly.
So we do. We have that discussion. The city manager has $85,000. We've made those decisions. What they're asking for is an exception to that. And I think that you should only have exceptions to these things when you have a really good reason. And the fact that it's more efficient and easier to do it is not a good reason. Unless there's some crisis, unless there's some...
I think we're saying the same thing. I really do. I think it's a matter, I mean, you're uncomfortable with the expediency.
Well, correct. I'm uncomfortable changing the procedures for expediency.
I understand totally. And as Lalo just said, it's our call.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we want to see every appropriation that comes through. And sometimes governing bodies lose faith in the administration and they want to see absolutely everything. So I think at some point you say, is this good or is this bad? End of discussion for me. Do you want a motion?
Yes, if
I'll
we can
make the
get it.
motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. I'll move that we approve these reappropriations with the exception of the planning department one for $500,000.
With what exception?
The planning department one for $500,000.
No, no, I'm not going to, no. You're going to have to get
You
somebody else to
seconded it
second
too early.
Because I didn't hear what you said. Get closer to the mic. No, I'm not going to penalize the planning department for $500,000.
Okay, is there a second? I'll second. Okay, do you want to speak to your motion?
Well, I think we've talked it quite a bit, but I think, Councilmember Niss, that the difference is it's not a matter of trust. It's not a matter of, it's a matter of that we have certain procedures in place. And you'd have to make a good argument. Otherwise, you could say, why not anytime, why have 85,000? Why not just let the city manager sign whatever he wants? We trust him. I mean, why have an 85,000 rule? If you're not going to follow those kind of procedures, you're going to get yourself in trouble. If you're always looking at expediency, as opposed to, we have these procedures, and if the procedures are too limiting, we should change the procedures. So that's the difference.
So I don't agree with that because I don't think,
sorry,
oh, sorry, the
Councilmember
second gets to talk.
Wilson.
Excuse me.
It just seems to me that setting up a $500,000 discretionary budget without sort of a huge amount of restriction on what it's going to get used for, with some money coming from someplace else that it was originally formed but didn't get spent. It seems to me that setting that up during the reappropriations process seems like kind of an odd way to do it. So I'll second the motion.
Councilmember Niss, did you?
So because I see this so differently, basically you have a CEO of your company, and the CEO of your company has a certain limit. At the county, the limit was 95,000. What the difference that it makes is there should be some ability of your CEO or your city, whomever it is, your manager, to make some of those discretionary calls. And I think, yes, 500,000 may sound like a lot, but I'm not sure you're going to get a whole lot for 500,000 given what we've been spending on transportation and attempting to get our house in order in many of the areas that Hillary has been dealing with. So I am not seeing this as a far out kind of issue, and I can hear your concern about the auditor and so forth. I can only say it is not an unusual process, nor is it an unusual practice. We're simply saying we don't like having it like that.
So with the exception, I've been on Finance Committee every year for the last, whatever, number of years I've been on council. I've never seen us do this. I mean, I don't recall ever you setting up a $500,000 fund out of something that was completely different. Reappropriations, every time I've looked at it in the past, has always been, we're taking the money that was appropriated for something and reappropriating it for the same thing. I've never seen it used in this way.
Let's see. I am sympathetic to the motion that this is $500,000. It was voted for the council for a very particular thing that did not happen. It becomes discretionary. I think the point has been made that the planning department, especially in its transportation work, is under severe pressure. And the council, every time it deals with the issue, asks for further work to be done on deadlines to get to move ahead. So let me suggest a friendly addition to the motion, that the first part of the motion is that is what, Greg?
Oh, that we approve the other appropriations.
other, and not this, but that this money is moved into a special council contingency fund, which will be set aside for transportation issues over the course of the year, and that when the council asks for something, the planning director can come and say, or the finance director can come and say, we would like to use X amount of dollars for this specific purpose.
Yes, you can add it to your current contingency or make it a special transportation contingency. I just had to make one clarification, Councilmember Sharp. We were not asking for a waiver of the 85,000 with this process, just to be clear. That we would still come to you with anything over 85, just so we were on the record on that, because we don't want to leave you with the wrong impression. That's not what we were asking for. So we would, anything you give us, we have to come to you with anything above 85. No matter what contingency it comes from.
Okay.
So if we take Councilmember Schmidt's approach, then the money would go into a separate transportation fund.
Within the general fund.
Within the general fund.
Yeah, and so what we would have to do is come back and write a report. Typically, when you put it in a contingency, technically you do not need a budget a budget amendment ordinance, because it's already appropriated for that purpose.
So I'm fine with Council Schmidt's approach then, if that's, because I don't see any difference from it being there or being in the budget stabilization reserve, frankly, except for it actually is
I guess
more focused on transportation now, as opposed to you can't use it for anything else actually in the meantime.
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned a little bit with the budget stabilization fund, because there's that, what has become an automatic
Right.
movement to the infrastructure.
So I'm good with your amendment.
Okay. Any further comment?
I'm going to clarify it once more. It will go into a special fund. I don't care whether it's called ABC or DEF, but it's a special fund that it is meant for transportation needs, correct?
Correct. So
And it doesn't change the 85,000 ceiling,
Correct.
correct?
So
No,
it
then
accomplishes
then
what we were asking you to do.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But let me just say a little further. If there's anything that I have spent more time and energy on, and email and phone calls, than those issues that have dealt with transportation this year, I don't know what it is. Between parking at down in Eric Filseth's area, hello, down there, whether it's parking in North Palo Alto or now it's moved across the street or whatever it may be, this is one of those areas where I keep hearing from citizens, you guys have to move on this, you've got to move it up, you've got to move it over. We have a real demand in this community for things that deal with transportation. So I am far more sympathetic with this than I would be if you tell me you need to re-roof the Roth building or something like that and stick that in a contingency. I think this is a real live issue in our community, and I want our transportation division and Hillary to be nimble with this, and I think this is the easiest way to be nimble.
Yeah, and that's the goal of it. Planning Director?
Thank you. I appreciate where this is trending. I just wanted to clarify, we had suggested this contingency for planning and transportation items, and the thought that there might be a larger planning issue in addition to transportation issues. I don't know whether you want to make it specific to transportation and parking or leave open the potential that this could be used, for example, if we wanted to proceed with the next phase of the downtown cap study or another big initiative like that that's not currently budgeted elsewhere.
And to
Entirely
remind you, the way you have set the motion, you give the direction, not the city manager.
Do you want to widen it?
I'm just laughing because, it gets wider and wider as you go through this process.
Yeah, I said transportation because the original council vote was for a shuttle program, which was transportation oriented. But that, of course, does not mean that as funding needs arise, as we go through the comp plan update, we won't respond to whatever the council is asking for.
So by putting in this fund low, anytime you want to use it, you'd need to do a BAO that would say
We
where it's
cannot
coming
touch it
from.
ourselves, correct?
You'd say where it's coming, right?
Well, we don't have to do a BAO technically, but we have to come to you to pull from there.
You have to come to us and pull it from there.
Yes, we
You'll
can't do
approve
it
by
ourselves.
I'm sorry. You will approve it by motion.
That's fine.
So it will be part of a recommendation language. You would say allocate $50,000 from the planning, transportation, parking contingency account towards that purpose. That's what that type of motion you would see.
Transportation contingency. 'cause
Whatever the council decides to call it.
That's a wider net. Okay, if there are no further comments.
Hillary? So now I'm concerned, actually, because, well, no, I mean, the issue is this. The issue is that you said transportation, and you may need to use it for something else. And I'm not saying it would be inappropriate to use it for something else. But if we leave it at transportation and you need to do a big planning initiative, then we have money sitting there and you have to find the money somewhere else, right? And so as long as we are making the decision at council, I'm fine with broadening it. Because my goal here is not to hamstring, make it even more difficult. And I think if we just have a transportation contingency, what we're doing is making it more difficult for you to do your job, not less. And if I'm wrong and you're fine with it just being transportation, say so and I'll shut up. So just being transportation, you're fine with that? Okay, I'm fine. Transportation it is.
Okay, any further comments?
It's almost midnight, I'm ready to vote.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
I guess we need to say, okay, all in favor?
Oh, we all push the button, is that what we do?
Yeah, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, brings us to item number 2 on the agenda, the storm drainage fee renewal. And there's a new title on that where it will sunset in 2017.
As PW is settling down, let me thank the other departments that came tonight for the reappropriations. Thank you, staff.
Good evening, Chair Schmidt and council members. I'm Brad Eggleston, Assistant Director of Public Works, and Joe Teresi, our Senior Engineer for the Public Works Storm Drain Section in Engineering, has already introduced himself. He'll be giving the presentation this evening. He's a longtime member in this role and was very involved in the passage of our 2005 storm drain fee ballot measure. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Brad. So we want to start off with some background. We're here tonight to talk about the future of funding for the Storm Drainage Fund. The Storm Drainage Fund was created by the council back in 1990, and the funds that come into the fund are generated through monthly user fees that are up here on city utility bills. The amount of the fee that property owners pay is based upon a land parcel's relative use of the municipal storm drain system as measured by the amount of impervious area or hardscape on the parcel. And at the current time, the fee generates approximately $6 million per year that's used to fund our storm drain capital improvement program, our storm drain maintenance, and the water quality protection programs. This fund and this fee is subject to the approval requirements of Prop 218, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. So Proposition 218 was passed by the voters of California back in November of 1996, and the key element that's in play here is that it affects property-related fees and says that those fees, except fees that fund sewer, water, and refuse collection services, cannot be imposed or increased without the approval of either a majority of property owners subject to the fee or 2/3 of voters. So our current funding program was set in place in 2005, at which time we did a Prop 218 election. At that time, we chose the method of doing a ballot by mail to property owners, and the current rate structure was approved by a majority, approximately 58% of property owners in that 2005 ballot measure. The ballot measure specifically funded the following items: a set of 7 high-priority capital improvement projects that totaled about $17 million in 2004 dollars, as well as enhanced storm drain maintenance and stormwater quality protection programs. At the time the measure was approved, the fee was set at $10 per month for a typical single-family residential property owner. There also had the option for council-approved annual inflationary increases. And in fact, the council has elected to impose those each year, so that from the rate that began at $10 per month in 2005 is now $12.63 for the current fiscal year, which equates to an approximate annual increase of about 2.4% per year. Also incorporated into the ballot measure was the idea of an oversight committee which meets and reviews annually our storm drainage fund budget and expenditures. It's a 5-member oversight committee that's appointed by council. And we're here tonight because that particular funding structure is set to sunset in June 2017. I would also say that the Oversight Committee has been very supportive of our program and is very interested in it continuing beyond 2017. There's much more work to be done, and so they're all behind us in this endeavor. So looking ahead, as I said, the existing rate structure will sunset in June 2017, and unless enhanced rates are approved by another ballot measure per Prop 218, the storm drainage fee will revert back to its pre-2005 rate of $4.25 per month, which will not support our current operational costs for storm drain maintenance, for state-mandated stormwater quality protection, and for debt service that we are paying on past borrowed money that was used to fund earlier capital improvement projects. It will also not provide adequate funding for the new requirements that we're expecting in our new regional stormwater discharge permit, which we expect to be adopted later this year. And it would not provide for a continuation of our storm drain capital improvement program. Oops. How do I go back? Thanks. So again, what we're recommending that the Finance Committee recommend to the Council is that we move ahead in the process of putting together a ballot measure for fall 2016, which would give property owners another chance to approve these higher fees. And it's really a 3-part process. Initially, we would want to convene a city manager-appointed blue ribbon committee to help us put together the spending plan that would be funded by the measure, and that would include both capital projects and operational programs. We have this past year updated our storm drain master plan and identified about $37 million in additional storm drain capital improvements that would increase the...
Could I just interrupt?
Sure.
You just mentioned the Blue Ribbon Committee members. How many are on it? How many were on it the last time?
The last time we did it in 2005, there were 15 members on the Blue Ribbon Committee.
So 10 years ago, there were 15 members?
Yes.
And are most of them still active or not?
Well, some of the members that were on the Blue Ribbon Committee are now on the Oversight Committee, but that's a 5-member body.
Okay, that's what I needed to know. Thanks.
Sure. So we do have a large number of capital needs remaining that need to be implemented in order to upgrade our system. And then again, need additional funding for maintenance and some of these state mandated water quality programs. So the final step would be this ballot measure, which would be done in accordance with Proposition 218. I suspect that the staff would recommend that we go the same way we did in 2005, and that is with a ballot by mail to property owners, and that would require a simple approval by a simple majority of those property owners returning the ballots. And in terms of a Blue Ribbon Committee, we would want a group that has a variety of backgrounds, areas of expertise, and perspectives with some of the following traits: being interested in the topic, being able to listen and build consensus, having their hand on the pulse of the community, and folks that would gain respect in the community, so that when they work with us to put together the ballot measure, it's not just a staff plan, it's really a community-based plan. According to the potential schedule that we've outlined, we would meet with this Blue Ribbon Committee over a 5-month period to formulate this recommendation that would then go to council for further action. And the next 2 slides just summarize the recommendations that are in the staff report. So again, we're asking that you ask the council to direct us to work towards a fall 2016 property owner vote by mail election, and that you direct the city manager to appoint a citizen advisory committee to assist staff with the development of that funding measure. This last slide goes over a potential schedule, and I won't read through the whole thing, it's in the staff report as well, but it shows the various steps that we would need to take to get to our goal of having an election in the fall of 2016, which, hoping that it would be successful, that would give us adequate information and funding ability, so that when we put together the fiscal 18 budget, we would know, how much money we have to deal with following the sunset of the original measure. So with that, Brad and I are here and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you very much. Council members?
Could I start with
Yes.
something? I would see no trouble with literally making the motion now to move ahead on this. I have one concern. We've just had an issue with a city manager appointed committee. And I'm somewhat uneasy with a city manager appointed Blue Ribbon Committee, and I'm interested in knowing what the rest of you think about that, because I would certainly support that. I know the kind of background the committee had before and some of the people who served on it, and I don't mean to in any way downgrade it, but I don't see it as something that is so complicated that you need 15 engineers to look at it. But at the same time, it really does, it needs somebody who can, at least, as they say, build consensus and get a sense of what the community wants and get the vote in the end. So, as I said, that's my only concern, and I'll be interested in knowing what the other 3 have to say about it.
Well, I'll respond to Councilmember Niss. I'm very concerned that storm drains could really excite the passions of the community. And that it's going to become hugely controversial.
You got your hand up there.
Hugely
again.
controversial.
What did you say?
I said,
you thought
I'm very
it was hugely controversial.
I'm very concerned that storm drains could excite the passions of the community in a hugely controversial way. So I'm going to say, I guess I have no problem with the way the city manager or the staff has suggested we do this. The only question I really had on this was, so we borrowed $1 million with no way to pay it back. Is that roughly what we did?
Well, even at the 425, that would generate enough money to pay back the debt. So we have money to pay back the
Zero
debt.
operations for storm drains.
Well, I think what I said in the report is that the 425 would generate about 2.1 million a year, and yeah, half of that would go towards this debt service that I believe runs until 2024.
And the operations cost about 2.5 under current, right? It's roughly my recollection.
Right.
We can take it out of contingency.
That's true.
I mean, I guess the other thing I would say is that when that debt was incurred, that was before Prop 218, and
Oh, it
before
was incurred
that,
before 218.
yeah, it's quite old, and before that time, the council had the ability to raise the rates itself. So that's one big change that we weren't anticipating.
Okay.
So the reason to do the by-mail ballot as opposed to putting a measure on the November 2016 is the 50% threshold as opposed to 2/3?
That's right.
Is there a substantial cost difference to the city in terms of a by-mail election versus putting a measure on the ballot?
Let me try to answer. It's a question that Beth should answer, but the cost that we get every time we ask for an election,
Right.
you know, usually we get a big 6-figure number.
Right.
And this, we manage it ourselves internally, so I
Okay,
venture to
so
guess that it'd be cheaper.
This would actually be cheaper than a ballot. Okay, all right. That's sort of the sensitivity. How many years do you want to extend the fee?
I think that would be part of what the Blue Ribbon Committee would recommend. The first time it was 12 years.
12 years.
It went by pretty fast, I'd say. But
I was going to say that if it goes to 12.63 million a year next year, and you take off the expenses, right? If I get this, sorry, $12.63 dollars per month, right? And it seems to me like after you take off the expenses, you got like $2.5–3 million left over to do capital projects with, something like that.
that's right.
So if you did it for another 12 years, but you got to pay debt service on the existing debt and so forth, how much of the 37 million of high priority and second priority projects do you actually get to?
We haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. We'll have to work out the numbers. It's all going to depend on how much the fee is and for how long it goes.
I was just wondering if you're entertaining sort of making the fee actually even larger than that or something like that.
I would hope that we could keep the fee close to what it is now. I think that will lower the burden of getting the approval. Back in 2005, we were asking for increasing it from 425 to 10, which was quite a
2x,
jump.
yeah.
And this time, I'm thinking of it more that we would just have a continuation, sort of at the same rate of increase as the existing fee, although we haven't run the numbers yet.
Councilmember Phillips, as Joe said, we still have a lot of work to do on this, but one of the biggest concerns from the last experience is that the inflator that we had on the fee did not keep up with the cost inflation of the actual construction of the projects. So that's something that's got to be discussed, because we cannot have a situation again where we felt that we weren't going to complete a couple of projects of money. And if those projects are significant enough and important to the community, then we need to have that conversation that whether we have some adjustment, an inflator different than CPI, because CPI was our inflator, or we create some level of reserve. I know you don't like reserves, that it helps us cover any cost overruns in the length of period that you're talking. So I think that has to be part of the discussion for us.
Is that the reason that there's a couple of these that are sort of still not completely brought in yet?
No, we had to sort of adjust because right after it passed, the cost of construction just skyrocketed, and our first big project was way over budget. But we sort of adjusted here and there, and we're on target to finish all 7 of the projects.
On the existing.
5 of the projects have already been completed, and on the 6th project, actually 2 of the 3 phases have been completed. So there's 1 phase of the 6th project, and then there's a 7th project, and we anticipate finishing those on time.
Okay, thanks very much.
I assume you're asking a political question, that we approve to move ahead on this on an election basis. especially since you're not giving us numbers to look at and ask about. So let me just give a little feedback on the political question. Councilmember Niss raised, an important point about election. 2016 is going to be a national election, high turnout, going to be a council election around compland issues, a very lively election. The storm drain, it's not going to be a quiet time to focus on that issue, but we're going to have to make do in that environment. And let me just toss out a couple numbers that we have spent to date, 17.6 million of the funds on project in North Palo Alto, 2.2 million in the south. Now the big south project is that last year's project, and that would bring that up to 8, but there's still a 2-to-1 ratio in spending. Now, acknowledge that the flood we have in San Francisco Creek drew a lot of the attention and the need for this, and that was the priority in this getting through. But moving into an election, you want to be able to draw on the city as a whole. So it is essential that the last project number 7 gets in place and done with a lot of publicity. As you move forward to look at the next round, I noticed that you didn't give us any details of the report other than the fact they want lots of money. But I assume you will be sensitive to the issue of north-south balance of some kind. Brad, did you?
Yeah, I would just say absolutely we're attuned to that. And while we didn't give details of the projects other than the kind of aggregate cost, the projects that are recommended in the updated master plan are scattered throughout the city, both south and north. And we've also thought a little bit as far as the makeup of this committee that it should include both north and south Palo Alto representation.
Yeah, I did notice in the listing of criteria for the commission, it says technical expertise, financing expertise, commercial interest. This is a parcel tax, and the amount of money that's going to come from commercial properties will probably be about 5 to 10% of the funding.
That's not actually correct. It's not a parcel tax. It's based on this idea of impervious area, and I believe the way it works is about 2/3 of the people that are eligible to vote are single-family residential homeowners, and yet the amount of money that's assessed is about 2/3 on the commercial side, because the commercial properties pay much more since they have much larger parcels with much more building and parking lot and hardscape.
So who benefits, who pays, right?
Yeah, that's the question. I guess the ERUs that you have here go from 0.8 to 1.4.
Well, that's just for the single-family residential. On the commercial and industrial, it's measured. So I don't know how much you want me to get into the details,
Okay.
but it's based on hardscape, and I can tell you that the commercial property owners pay about 2/3 of the total fees that we collect.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you just asked for a political response, and I'm trying to give you the types of things that might be on people's minds in November of 2016. The other issue that people are sensitive to is the insurance, flood insurance fees that have gone up by a factor of 2 or 3 over the last 5 or 6 years. And that has sea level rise as a big piece in it. And the storm drain is associated with, you know, during high tides, it's harder to pump water into the sea. So question is there any of the funding that might go to the city's ability to deal with our neighbors with sea level rise? So that would be a question I would have. Finally, we have just had the experience of the CAC committee appointments, and there's some sensitivity around, you know, a city manager appointed committee. So you're asking us tonight to approve this being a city manager appointed committee.
Yeah, we're asking that for you to recommend that to the full council.
I guess one question I'd have is you have given us the first 5 pages of the storm drain master plan, but we don't have a copy of the whole thing with all the descriptions and data in it. Would this be a useful document to have?
Sure. And at this point, we're planning to take this to the full council on October 19th, so we can certainly make the full plan available to council members.
So we are only recommending to the council.
That's correct. We're
Okay.
recommending that you recommend the council have
Okay,
us.
that's different, yeah.
Yeah.
So this will be available for the full council?
It will be an action item, so there'll be full discussion at the council. So
Right. But the document will be available?
that's what I heard Joe say, yes.
Okay. Okay, that are my
Could I
questions.
ask one
Yeah.
quick one? Sewers are not glamorous, no matter what. And so I think one of the issues that we've dealt with before, if I remember correctly, is how to get everyone to return their ballots. And I don't remember, do you need a certain, you do need a certain amount of those that get sent out, correct?
No, you actually
Or
don't.
you simply
but
need a majority of those that respond?
it's a majority of those that respond. And last time, it was over 50% that we got back, so, you know, I thought we did fairly well.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I had forgotten which way it worked.
It's like a school bond issue.
Yes, it is. And as I recall too, compared to any county measure, this is relatively cheap.
That's what we surmised without checking in with Beth. Just my recollection was anytime that, even if it was an election already established, just adding another item was significant expense.
Right. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would move approval of the discussion of the storm drainage fee renewal and send it on to the full council. Got me to read the whole thing?
Second?
So you're removing the staff recommendation, right?
Right, yes. The staff recommendation is to create a storm drain committee, a storm drain blue ribbon committee to assess the possibility or to discuss the possibility of putting this on the ballot for next fall.
So when you say move it on to the full council, so you're just going to agendize it for an open discussion of this, of whether or not we should do this?
It is currently agendized on the tentative agenda for October 19th as an action item.
Okay. Fair enough.
Expect a full council. I mean, expect a full contingency in the chambers. It's a very popular issue.
Oh, I think that it's going to be just, people are going to be up in arms.
Oh, I think so.
Do I hear a second?
I'm going to abstain when I vote. Yep. Mostly because we're going to have a full council discussion of it, so I want to see what the rest of the council has to say.
Well, this simply sends it on to the council for a full discussion.
No, we're recommending, we're doing the staff recommendation. Direct the staff
Well, then let me
towards a fall
rephrase it.
2016 property owner vote by mail. And
So-
I'm not willing to make that recommendation without hearing what my peers of council have to say. If we're going to have a full discussion
Okay.
at council,
Council
why have it?
So Attorney Scharf, may I restate my motion?
Yep.
My goodness. let me suggest then that this suggestion be sent on to council for a full discussion as to whether or not we should have a storm drain fee renewal set and guided by a blue ribbon committee.
I will second that. Okay, would you like to speak to your motion?
And no, I can't imagine that we wouldn't do this, and we may have a full discussion at council, but I'd be surprised if we really don't have support for going forth with a storm drain committee to look at the possibility of another election in order to maintain this. It's pretty hard to function without a storm drain system in our community, especially looking at the year ahead.
So the motion, just so I understand it? Oh,
If
sorry.
I could speak to
Has
my
a second.
Yeah, I think it is important that we move ahead with this. This is the right time. I think it's important that you come to the council with a clear message of success of what has been done, what is ongoing now. It's very important to introduce the election issues as you did tonight, and make everyone aware of the steps that need to be taken. And I would look forward to a good discussion of that issue with the full council.
So just so I understand, the motion is that we, is what? Is that this move forwards to the council for a full discussion?
Yes.
Okay, and there's no recommendation as to any of these. That's the motion.
Right.
There's no recommendation, but in my comments, I've certainly indicated that I'm quite enthused about the idea.
Right. Okay.
But it's not part of the motion.
Got it.
Okay, any further comments? Okay, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you.
I certainly hope we have a very long discussion at council about it.
Okay. That brings us to item number 3 on the agenda. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda, Municipal Code Section 2.28.080. I believe we've had a discussion of this already.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening again, Walter Rossman, Budget Director. This item recommends that the Council approve budget and table organization amendments by motion versus adoption of an ordinance. In June, I presented this recommendation to the Finance Committee. After a lively discussion, the committee approved that the item be heard by the Council as an action item, asked to staff to address the searchability of Council-approved budget amendments. Since the Council's action calendar has been quite heavy this summer and fall, I felt it to be best to come back to the committee, show you some changes we're proposing, and ask you for your full support. So I will talk about quickly the background, how we're doing budget amendment ordinances today, and we talked about this a little bit before in item 1. Recommended changes to the municipal code and how these changes will enhance transparency. When a budget change request is requested and taken to council for consideration, budget staff authors a budget amendment ordinance. This ordinance is mostly repetitive except for the budget transaction. The ordinance attached is to the city manager's report, as you've seen many times. The example I'm showing here with highlighted in yellow on the slide is the council authorization for funding the residential food scraps program. That part is the only piece of the budget amendment ordinance which is different from the council report, which you saw in March this year. After council approves the budget amendment ordinance, the city clerk's office assigns an ordinance number and routes the document to 6 office for signatures and posts it on the website, which you see on the next slide. The ordinances are ordered by calendar year and not fiscal year. The budget is obviously handled or administered by fiscal year, and it's mixed in with other ordinances. This link, if you see on the website, only shows you the direct link to the ordinance. It does not link you to the actual city manager's report. With the recommended process as approved by the committee in June, council, or recommended for approval by the committee in June, council will approve budget and table of organization amendments by motion. With this change, budget amendments are explicitly stated in the recommendation language, so you will see the actual budget transaction in the motion, and further, in response to the committee's concern, staff created a new section of the city's website. The budget adjustment and monitoring website lists all budget amendments, starting with fiscal 2015, and links directly into the applicable city manager report. As stated before, with this change, the bureaucratic process is streamlined and staff can focus on more value-added work. So taking you to a sample of the food scraps program, here's how it would look differently to the council. In the recommendation language, you would see the actual budget transaction listed. Now linking over to the budget adjustment monitoring website, which Eric is going to do here in a second, you'll see that budget amendments are grouped by fund type. There was a general fund, enterprise fund, special revenue funds. That's how we set it up, as well as by fiscal year. There we go, great. And if you click on any of those links here, like the first one about the grant the council approved in August, it links directly into the CMR for that item. With this, we recommend that the council approves a budget and table organization amendment by the motion, and the Finance Committee supports this action, and we're committed to keep this website up to date, as you just saw, which lists all the budget amendments, links to the city manager's report, and actually makes information much more accessible to the public. This concludes my report.
Could you go back to the recommendation? The last slide didn't quite show.
So it's not a verbatim statement of the recommendation which you see on the CMR. This is just a summary.
Great. Let's see, I have one public card, Herb Borak. You have 3 minutes.
Vice Mayor and Chair Schmidt and committee members, I don't even think you should be discussing this item. The committee made a decision when this was on your agenda, and the decision was a committee recommendation. A standing committee of the council made a recommendation to the council, and the next step is for staff to place that on the council agenda. You noticed that this lowly staff member takes responsibility for ignoring that responsibility. City manager's hands are clean. He's not the one who did it. The assistant city manager's hands are clean. He's not the one who did it. The director of administrative services, also known as the chief financial officer, his hands are clean. He didn't make the decision to stick this back on the agenda. It's just this lowly employee. He's not an important person. So if you agree with me that this was the wrong thing to do, to put it on your agenda again, you can't blame the city manager, the assistant city manager, or the director of administrative services. You've already got a fall guy. In regards to the things that staff is promising to do, they can do all of those things without making any change to the municipal code. You can exactly all the things I said of placing something on a website, you can do. The argument that you have to scroll through all of the ordinances on the city clerk's website to find those related to budget amendment ordinances is ridiculous. I mean, there is a find function in the edit menu, and that function works even on the copies of Windows that are installed in the library computers that have a message that say they are not genuine versions of Windows. It seems to me that this is related to the first item on your agenda. Talked about transparency and the city manager's authority regarding the ability to spend money within $85,000. When Gary Baum was city attorney, he advised the city manager that contracts with department heads, which are over $85,000, would have to come to the city council for approval as ordinances. As soon as he left the city attorney, the city manager stopped bringing those to you and simply sent you a memo. At the time, you were approving an appointment of a department head and saying what the department head's salary was. But if there's a contract, you've never seen it. I'm not going to repeat all the arguments that I made since they're in the minutes that you have from the previous meeting, but I'm surprised that this is on your agenda again. I'm surprised in the way it's come to you on your agenda when you've already made a decision, and I'm surprised if you would tolerate this behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. Council members, comments, questions, motions?
I move approval.
I'll second it.
Okay, do you want to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, I wasn't at that finance committee meeting, but read the staff report, and I think you guys were responsive to the concerns of the committee. Well, I wasn't on it, it seems that way to me. And, you know, I think it's a fine way to streamline things.
Do you want to speak to your second?
No, thank you.
Eric, comment?
What's the best possible reason you can think of not to do this?
What'd you say, Eric?
What's the best possible reason not to do this, right?
That's a great question. I'm going to ask that question in the future.
Sorry for the generic question.
So at least then we can be prepared the next time, because we may be getting this question.
Right.
Appreciate that. You know, I don't know, because what we heard from the committee is that we wanted to make this searchable, we wanted to make this accessible. That's what we changed with the website. We're probably one of the very few cities in the Bay Area who do this. I've not seen it anywhere else, and I did not scan all of them either. And I actually internally, what I learned from the accounting division and other departments, they really like it. Because they suddenly see, oh, there's my budget amendment ordinance. It's posted. I know it got approved. And we already moved the money anyway by that time. So, but I got a lot of positive responses actually from departments, because it's easier for them to see the information. And obviously to the public, because they know exactly what we're doing, and each item they can track, and you can track each item which you approved throughout the fiscal year.
I mean, you sort of characterized this as kind of an IT and web kind of thing, right? I mean, is that all?
From a searchability perspective?
I mean, overall, I mean, searchability, okay, got it.
Well, it's also packaging the information. Okay. So it is an issue of somebody who doesn't understand, not necessarily what ordinances are, that now it's all packaged on one site. If you look for the budget, you see all the changes right there, not just the adopted budget, but all changes which the council approved.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just make a comment to the clerk first. I found a dramatic change in tonight's material that had the Finance Committee minutes, where we could read through and go over the discussion we had last time.
Are you on this page?
The attached.
You're on the report, right?
Yes.
The minutes in it?
Yes. And last night, we had only action minutes, council, well, full minutes from the PTC. And obviously, I'm very much like the minutes of the Finance Committee that we have that help us continue a discussion that we started. My recollection is that we asked in the dialogue that took place that night for you to do something for us, and you have come back, so I do appreciate that. I played around a little bit with the website and found that it was helpful, especially the ability to take any single item and immediately get the CMR associated with it. And I could see how historically, as time goes on, it will be beneficial to be able to search the budget and then the budget amendments in a direct way. I think the origin of your coming to us was to operate a little more efficiently in the department. And the concern was to make sure that it's transparent and open. And I guess my experience of playing around seems to be that you've accomplished that. So I would support the motion. Palo?
I just wanted to add that Walter is a member of our executive leadership team, for the record.
Good, thank you. Okay, any other comments on that? All in favor of the motion? That passes unanimously. Thanks very much for bringing it back to us.
And Greg, I didn't want to do this before you voted, but I want to ask about the minutes. These are sense minutes or are these verbatim?
Those are verbatim.
These are verbatim minutes.
So,
That's why they're so good.
well, some of the verbatim are terrific, some of them are not, because we speak in sentences that aren't totally
But Liz, yours are
smooth
always
and-
fantastic.
Yes. Even Councilmember Sharf occasionally drifts a bit. So, but having the minutes, I think, helps enormously. And as we mentioned last night, it's interesting that Planning and Transportation has full minutes, Finance has full minutes. I presume you're doing full minutes for planning for Policy and Services? So the only ones that are getting shortchanged is the City Council, right? You don't have to answer, Beth. That's a rhetorical question.
It has appeared in one of the reports on an item. I forget what it was, but
What appeared?
minutes of the council meeting. But
In
not very
one
often.
of your, you got some minutes of the council?
In one of the reports we got. I forget the context, but it has been
Before we
used.
went to the new action minutes?
Okay, if there's no other items on the agenda, let's turn to the future schedule. And I know we've had a little back and forth, so I'm very interested in what's ahead. It's on the back.
It's on the back of your agenda, and it's not all inclusive. Keep in mind that we get this out earlier than we used to, so some items have changed. And I think there's a request well, let me go through it. So the next meeting was scheduled for October 6th, but we do not have any items, so you can take that off your board. It's an open night.
Okay.
I could do that right while I sit here.
October 6th.
October 6th.
We did not have any items. The next meeting in October would be October 20th, and we're going to come to you to speak to you about GASB 68. So it's the new accounting requirement on how we include our pension, unfunded pension liability in our financials. So we'll give you a presentation about what that is and what the implications are to our financials in preview to you seeing the financials later in November.
Great.
We will also have November 3rd as a meeting. And currently the tentative agenda is, I'm hopeful that all four of you are able to attend that meeting because we have tentatively scheduled Mr. Bartel to return to discuss the pension discussion we continued from the council meeting. If I get a confirmation tonight, we'll lock him up. He's got it locked, but we'll confirm that for him to show up and continue that discussion with you.
So the October 20th and the November 3rd are connected?
Somewhat. Mr. Bartel can talk to GASB 68, but We were going to bring our external auditor for that night because it's more appropriate for the auditor, external auditor that does the financial audit, to tell you where we're at. So we have David Bullock coming from that.
But we might be making a commitment to at least the next fiscal year's pension payment before we have the session with Bartel.
I think there'll be opportunities for you to take action and give us direction for what else we need to come up with methodologies. My recollection that the Finance Committee wanted us not to, the Finance Committee, not to make final recommendations, but
Right.
get options ready.
Yeah, okay.
Then the other item is new renewables for energy power repurchase agreements from utilities. Moving on to November 17th, that's when we bring you the year-end financials, the CAFRA, and Mr. Bullock will come with his team as well to give you their opinion, and Harriet will be here with her team as well.
And we'll have his financial report at that time?
That is correct. And so we'll talk to you about the recommendations we're making to you that will be included in the financials in terms of excess revenues. We alerted you through the third quarter that we're doing quite well. And so there's also quite a list of needs. So we'll update you on our recommendations for the reserves.
Great.
The next item that we have would be for December 17th, the long-range financial forecast. So we got a lot of heavy-duty items for you. And I know you had an interest in discussing other planning items.
Yeah, I guess I had noted in the council future agendas, they had an identified time in mid-November that they were going to look at the Finance Committee recommendation on the fiscal study and the DEIR. And I guess in talking with Hillary, she said that report will not be ready in November.
Correct.
Since it is essential, though, for us moving ahead on the comp plan DEIR, she suggested coming in December and having a session at least around a preliminary report or the critical assumptions in the fiscal study or something like that. And it would seem to make sense. It would fit in with our discussion of the long-range financial forecast and certainly the comp plan discussions.
I had discussion with a member of her team leading the effort, and they're trying to determine whether they can meet the deadline. Right now it's on their tentative, but not tentative enough to give it to me yet. There is another meeting in December, early December, that I did not share with you because there's nothing on the agenda. So I say it's one of those, let's continue the discussion on the 20th and see where we're at. Maybe by then we'll have an update on what they can do, because it's dependent on some of the analysis that the consultant is preparing. And I know that I've seen some of the numbers, and I've had questions on the numbers, so they had to go back and try to rework those numbers. So
Yeah.
there's a component there that is not completed yet.
I guess my feeling about it is so important, and to get, council members involved in the discussion at a earlier stage is important. So I guess I would certainly encourage that, whatever they have
Yes.
might be appropriate if my colleagues want to add anything to that.
And from a staff perspective, we agree with you. My concern is that we have to have a good base start. It has to be, we have to agree on that and understand what that is. Otherwise, we may go in the wrong direction. And so that's my concern, that we get a good, clean base and an understanding. And if we have a difference of opinion from their recommendation from our view, that we bring them up to you and share them. So we're trying to reconcile those differences.
Yeah, I guess my concern is just that the council is involved before you reach final, that, we've made our mind up on the
Well,
critical
from my
issues.
perspective, I don't expect them to be final. I think it's a base, for discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully that would be early December.
Well, that's what they're aiming for, but they didn't give me a firm commitment yet.
Okay. Well, I guess you'll let us know. And any other questions from my colleagues on our schedule?
Did you say the 17th of December was the long-range financial forecast?
Yes.
That's correct. The December 17th.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. December 17 long range, November 17 year-end financial. So 1 month before we'll give you the final results.
Calendars, right? Yes. Yeah, so they send it out to our calendar.
Yeah, these are your regular standing meetings, just letting you know what the tentative agenda
Yeah.
is. The only one that I kind of need some feedback from you is to make sure that the 3rd of November works, because I like to. It works for me. I'd like to make sure that all of you are here because it's an important discussion.
November 3rd?
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless, I'm flooded out of my house or something.
Sounds good. We'll go with that.
The roads and the sewer system don't work.
That's all we had. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Lalo. Appreciate that.
You did.
Thank you.
I tried hard.
Meeting is over.